Hello everyone, if you're new to my channel, consider liking and subscribing. It will make me feel wonderful if you do that. Thanks. By the way, I also have another Naruto and Luffy fanfiction channel. If you are interested, link is in the description.
One Piece Randomizer by Grey Ninja 27i. An ordinary boy dies and is reincarnated into the body of none other than Monkey D. Luffy, equipped with a randomizer system. What he doesn't realize is that this system doesn't just influence his life, it influences the entire world around him. The warlord of my channeler, What If Lord, Black Money Young Leon, Garrick Russell, Ben Brownlee, Case Clark, Tristan Ward, KSG, PL4YZ, Brian McKenzie. Join the channel membership if you will like to support the channel. Adios.
Shellstown, Raphael system. It had been 3 long weeks since Luffy and Uda set sail from Fuchsia village, and they had been adrift on the vast, endless sea ever since. As it turned out, unlike in the anime, where journeys across the ocean seemed to pass in a few weeks or in a few panels, the real sea was far more expansive. Large, inhabited islands were scattered across great distances, and the reality of travel was much slower than Luffy had anticipated. With only the two of them on the boat, their journey sometimes felt tedious, but since Luffy and Uda had grown up together, they found ways to entertain themselves. They shared stories from their childhood, played games they had invented long ago, and even indulged in the Uno cards Luffy had won from his system. Still, more often than not, the open sea felt like an endless stretch of nothingness, and they quickly learned how much patience sailing required. As for their food situation, the generous supplies Rouge and Makino had sent them off with had long since run out by the end of the first week. With so much idle time, it was easy to fall into the habit of snacking. Uda had packed a fishing rod, which became their lifeline for fresh, also stopped at small, uninhabited islands along the way, hunting what wildlife they could find and gathering fruits and berries to keep themselves going. Thus they fall into a routine of scavenging and fishing, repeating the cycle every few days. The slow pace of their voyage had also given Luffy time to reflect on just how different the real sea was from the One Piece world he knew. In the anime, travel between islands always seemed quick and eventful, but here, the reality was far more mundane. He found himself wondering how anime Luffy, despite being an emperor now, had managed to spend so little time just sailing when they hadn't even encountered a major island yet. Another thing that puzzled him was the absence of Alvida's ship. However, it made sense after giving it some thought. In the original timeline, Luffy only ended up on her ship because his small rowing boat was caught in a whirlpool, forcing him to jump into a barrel, which was later found by Alvida's crew. But in this timeline, Luffy and Uda were on a larger, sturdier boat. On top of that, both had honed their observation haki, which helped them steer clear of danger. Luffy could only hope that Kobe would still manage to escape from Alvida and pursue his dream of joining the Marines. Their journey had been peaceful. That is until today. After 3 weeks of drifting through the ocean, they finally spotted a large island with a bustling port in the distance. Without hesitation, they adjusted their course and headed straight for it. This must be Shellstown, Luffy thought as their boat docked in the port, the town's welcome sign standing tall in front of them. I wonder if Zoro's here. Once they had secured the boat, both of them leapt onto the dock, feeling solid ground beneath their feet for the first time in weeks. Finally, people, Uda exclaimed, stretching her arms wide. I was getting so tired of staring at endless blue. Well, you'd better get used to it, Luffy said, stretching his body in turn. That's gonna be our life for the next few years. Shut up and let me complain in peace. Uda shot back, swatting his arm playfully. Anyway, what's the plan? I should definitely check if Zoro is in this town or not. With that thought, Luffy turned toward Uda. You go explore the town, and see if anything catches your eye. I'll grab supplies, and we'll meet up at the local tavern once we're done. Sounds like a plan, Uda agreed with a nod. Stay safe and keep your guard up, Luffy warned her. After that, Luffy quickly handed her some money before parting ways, each heading off in a different direction. After parting with Uda, instead of heading to the market as he had said, Luffy walked straight toward the marine base. His mind was focused on confirming whether Zoro was really in town. As he strolled through the streets, he noticed the town's infrastructure was run down despite the bustling activity. Money was clearly circulating, but it wasn't improving the town. It's either the people are too stingy, or someone is bleeding the town dry, Luffy thought. And knowing what I do about this world, it's probably the latter. Just as he was deep in thought, an old man with a long white beard approached him. "Young man, you must be new here. I don't recall seeing you before," the man said, eyeing Luffy curiously. "Yeah, just got here," Luffy replied casually. "I thought so, seeing how you're heading toward the marine base without a care," the old man said, stroking his beard. "Well, since you're new, let me give you a word of advice. If possible, get out of this town without attracting the attention of the Marines or the Marine captain of this town." Why is that?" Luffy asked, feigning ignorance. "I mean, I'm not planning to cause any trouble here, so why would the Marines be interested in a random traveler like me?" "Yeah, that would have been the case anywhere else, but here in this town, the Marine captain, Axe Hand, Morgan, is a moody, cruel tyrant who abuses his power." The old man's eyes darkened as he explained. "Trust me, you could sneeze wrong, and that man would put you up for execution. That's why I try to remain as inconspicuous as possible." "Thank you, sir, I'll keep that in mind," Luffy nodded, thanking the man before continuing his walk toward the base. As the old man watched him go, shaking his head in disappointment, Luffy couldn't help but smirk to himself. Yeah, the word inconspicuous doesn't seem to like Luffy very much. A few minutes later, Luffy arrived outside the marine base, but to his disappointment, there was no sign of Zoro being tied up in the courtyard. "Looks like Zoro hasn't arrived yet. Should I wait here?" he wondered. Notice. Master, this world has shown significant inconsistencies compared to the world of One Piece from your memories. Therefore, it's highly likely that the individual Roronoa Zoro may not arrive on this island, might be female, or may have taken a different path in life. There's also a possibility that he hasn't been born in this world or has died due to reasons beyond your control. Consequently, waiting here could prove hindering to your progress." "I see," Luffy thought for a moment, nodding his head. "You're right. There's no need to stop here. If Zoro is destined to be my companion, then I'll meet him sooner or later." With that, Luffy left the marine base behind and headed back into the town to restock on supplies before meeting Uda at the tavern. Meanwhile, Uda wandered through the streets, taking in her surroundings, but something felt off. Despite the busy market, an air of unease hung over the town. She frowned, her sharp senses picking up on the tension around her. Then just as she passed a group of townspeople, she overheard a conversation that confirmed her suspicions. "They say Morgan's son, Helmeppo, has been causing trouble again," a woman whispered to her friend. "Of course, he has," the other woman replied in an equally hushed yet bitter voice. "That spoiled brat acts like he owns this town. I'm just glad no one's crossed his path recently." Uda's frown deepened. "Helmeppo, huh?" she thought, but then shook her head, deciding it wasn't her problem. She knew that getting involved in a local issue wasn't a wise choice. Right now, she had other things to focus on. However, as she continued exploring, the sound of a child crying caught her attention. Turning toward the alley where the noise came from, she found a little girl with dark hair being bullied by 3 older kids. "Hey!" Uda's voice rang out, as she entered the alleyway while glaring at the 3 children. The kids stopped and turned, their faces lighting up with amusement at the sight of someone daring to interfere. "This isn't your business," the apparent ringleader, a boy slightly older than the others, sneered. "Get lost." Uda folded her arms and narrowed "You leave her alone before I make it my business?" The bullies exchanged glances, clearly sizing her up. Sure, the girl in front of her looked older, but to their eyes, she didn't seem particularly impressive. After all, with a slender figure and beautiful looks, Uda didn't seem like a typical fighter, especially to the children who hadn't seen the wider world. "You're asking for trouble, lady," the leader said, folding his hands to his chest. "We're Helmeppo-sama's friends. We do what we want here." More like his lackeys, Uda thought with annoyance. Letting out an exasperated sigh, she said, "You got 3 seconds to get lost before I stop being nice." The ringleader chuckled, clearly underestimating her. "Oh yeah? And what are you gonna?" Before he could finish, Uda casually coated her fist in hockey and punched the concrete wall beside her. The impact left a visible crack, and the force of it silenced the alley. "Wah! How did you?" he stammered, struggling to comprehend how a seemingly weak-looking girl like her could do something like that. "I told you to leave her alone," Uda said coldly, her voice dripping with authority. She glanced at the three bullies, who were frozen in place, fear finally sinking in. "Unless you want to replace that wall, I suggest you apologize to this girl, now." I'm sorry," the three bullies squeaked in unison, clearly terrified of Uda. "Good. Now get out of here," Uda said in a cold voice. Without another word, the boys scrambled to their feet and bolted out of the alley, their footsteps fading into the distance as they fled away from the demon girl, as they dubbed Uda in their minds. After the bullies ran off, the alley fell silent. Uda knelt beside the little girl, who was wiping her tears away with the back of her hand. "Hey, you alright?" Uda asked, her tone soft and comforting now. The girl nodded timidly, wiping her tears with the back of her hand. Thank you, miss." "My name's Uda," she said, smiling warmly. "What's yours?" "Rika," the girl replied quietly. "I didn't do anything wrong. They just started picking on me because my mom won't give them free food anymore." "Your mom runs a restaurant?" Uda asked. "No, a tavern," Rika explained. "But Helmeppo and his friends always come in and demand free food. When my mom stopped giving it to them, they started bothering us." Uda sighed. "I'm sorry to hear that," she said, knowing she couldn't do much to solve Rika's situation unless she stayed in the town, which wasn't an option. "By the way, can you take me to your tavern? I promised my friend we'd meet there." Rika nodded, and together they made their way through the town toward the tavern. After purchasing enough supplies for a month, Luffy finally located the tavern and settled in to wait for Uda. However, he didn't have to wait long, as just a few minutes later, Uda walked in, holding the hand of a little girl. "Hey, Uda," Luffy greeted. "Who's the stray you picked up?" he teased, nodding toward the girl, who looked at him curiously. "Shut up, Luffy. Be nice to my new friend," Uda playfully scolded, giving him a mock glare. She then turned to the girl and smiled. "This is Luffy, the one I told you about." "Is he nice like you?" Rika asked, her wide eyes filled with innocent curiosity. "Yes, he is. But he can be a bit silly sometimes," Uda said with a snicker, causing Luffy to roll his eyes. Just then, a woman with brown hair rushed out from behind the counter, her face lined with worry as she spotted her daughter. "Rika, what are you doing with these people?" "Mom." Rika's face lit up as she ran toward her mother. "This nice big sister saved me from bullies," she exclaimed, before launching into a retelling of the earlier incident. After Rika's mother listened to her daughter, the woman's eyes softened with gratitude as she turned to Uda. "Thank you for saving my daughter," she said sincerely. "It was nothing," Uda waved her hand dismissively, as though it wasn't a big deal. "Please, take a seat," Rika's mother said, gesturing toward the tables. "I'll prepare the best meal I can as thanks for your kindness." "Well, we won't say no to a good meal," Uda said, taking a seat. Then, glancing at Rika's mother, she asked, "Rika told me about this guy named Helmeppo harassing you. Why don't you do something about him?" Rika's mother sighed deeply, frustration lighting her voice. "It's not that I don't want to, but Helmeppo is Captain Morgan's son. Doing anything to him would put both me and Rika in danger." "I get that, but if you don't stand up to him now, things will only get worse," Uda said, gently ruffling Rika's hair. "He'll do something worse than just throw insults in the future." "I know. But what can I do?" Rika's mother clenched her fist and bit her lip in frustration, knowing that it wouldn't take long for Uda's words to become reality. "What about you?" Luffy suddenly interjected into the conversation, though his question wasn't directed at Rika's mother but rather at the people of the town sitting in the tavern. "Are you guys really okay with living under some marine captain's thumb?" he asked, his eyes sweeping over the room. The tavern fell into a tense silence. Some people avoided his gaze, while others looked troubled. Finally, a man stood up. "You don't understand. Captain Morgan is too powerful. We can't do anything against him." Luffy scoffed. "You sound like a bunch of spineless losers," he said, his voice sharp and unapologetic. Murmurs of anger rose from the crowd, their faces flushed with indignation. "In my opinion, people who live under tyranny without even trying to fight back are worse than the tyrant himself." Inside his heart, Luffy knew what he was saying wasn't entirely logical since Captain Morgan was actually quite strong and could probably wipe out this entire town. However, at this moment, He knew that Uda's actions earlier today would lead to a confrontation with Captain Morgan sooner or later. That's why he was planting the seeds of rebellion in the people, hoping these people would stand by his side when the time came. Just as the tavern began to buzz with angry retorts, the door suddenly burst open. A young man with a cleft chin and light blonde hair swaggered in, accompanied by 3 familiar bullies and a feral-looking wolf with maddened yellow eyes. This was none other than Helmeppo, the son of Captain Axehand Morgan. "Boss, that's the girl who insulted you and said you're an infertile moron," the bully from earlier said, pointing at Uda. "When did I say that?" Uda wondered to herself, but then she saw the cruel smile on the bully's face and realized that he was obviously exaggerating to get her into more trouble. So she just shook her head and rolled her eyes. "Oh, really?" Helmeppo sneered, leering at Uda. "Well, I'm feeling generous today. I'll forgive you if you agree to come with me." "In your dreams, moron," Uda scoffed in disdain. "I'd rather be fish food than go anywhere with you." "What did you say?" Helmeppo's face turned red with anger. "You'll regret insulting me, Zoro. Teach this girl a lesson," he yelled, releasing the wolf. The wolf lunged at Uda with terrifying speed, intent on tearing her flesh apart. "Big sis!" Rika screamed, her eyes wide in fear as the wolf closed in on Uda. However, what happened next left everyone with their eyes and mouths wide open. Instead of being scared or dodging the wolf's attack, Uda merely showed an annoyed expression and punched the lunging wolf on the head, sending it crashing to the ground. The wolf whimpered in pain as 2 buns appeared on its head. It then shivered in fear as Uda squatted down and looked the wolf directly in its eyes. "Rika, come here," Uda said, and the little girl hesitantly appeared next to her. "Listen, pup," Uda said in an eerily quiet voice. "Look at this girl and remember her scent. From now on, you are going to protect her and her mother. Is that clear?" The poor wolf whimpered in fear and meekly nodded his head. Then it stood up on his shaky leg and stood next to Rika in a protective stance, glaring him in this position. "Good pup," Uda smiled and patted the wolf's head. Then she stood up, a smug smile on her face as she glanced back at Helmeppo. "Is that all?" "You?" Helmeppo stammered, his body trembling in fear and rage. In a moment of panic, he drew a gun and aimed it at Uda. "Stay back, or I'll shoot." "I dare you. Do it, bitch," Uda said confidently, her hand resting on her waist. Fear gripped Helmeppo's heart, his hands trembling as his finger hovered over the trigger. However, before he could pull it, Luffy appeared beside him, crushing the pistol in his bare hand as if it were made of paper. The entire tavern fell silent, once again stunned by the display of power before them. Only one question echoed in their minds. Who the hell are these 2? Where the hell did they come from? Helmeppo stared at the crushed gun in shock. Before he could react, Luffy's fist slammed into his face, sending him flying out of the tavern. He landed hard on the ground, groaning in pain as he touched his face, realizing that Luffy's punch had broken his nose and knocked out 2 teeth. "You!" Helmeppo screeched, his face now a mix of fear and fury. "Just you wait, I'll tell my father, and both of you will be executed, executed." He scrambled to his feet and ran toward the marine base, his lackeys stumbling behind him. "Well, I guess I got us in trouble," Luffy chuckled, glancing at Uda. "Please, don't get ahead of yourself," Uda scoffed. "I was the one who started this whole ordeal," she said, smirking back at him. "That's true," Luffy chuckled. Then he paused for a moment, as a sudden idea crossed his mind. "Uda, I have an idea," Luffy said, whispering something in her ear. "What do you think? Would you be able to do it?" Not bad at all," Uda's eyes gleamed. "Yeah, I can do that. But will you be okay by yourself?" "Yeah, no matter how strong Morgan is, he's not my opponent," Luffy said with a confident smile. "Well, that's what I like to hear," Uda said, patting his shoulder. "Well, then I'll be off," Uda said, dashing out of the tavern. "Now that's taken care of," Luffy said, turning to Rika's mother with a polite and charming smile. "Ma'am, can we have that meal you promised earlier?" To be continued. Captain Axehand Morgan, Raphael. System. In the marine base of Shell's Town, Captain Morgan, also known as Axehand Morgan, stood in his office, staring out over the town through a large window. His imposing figure, with his iron jaw and the massive axe replacing his right hand, cast a dark shadow across the room. Morgan was a towering man, both in stature and ego, known for ruling the town with an iron fist. He believed that those in positions of power were above the law and could do whatever they wanted without consequences, and his reign over Shell's town was marked by cruelty and tyranny born out of such belief. As he admired the view, a group of nervous Marines stood at attention, waiting for his next order. Morgan, with his usual arrogance, spoke without turning around, in his usual cold and commanding voice. "The people of this town should be grateful for my presence. Without me, they would be nothing but weak and pathetic worms." The Marines exchanged uneasy glances, none daring to contradict their captain. Morgan's reputation was built not only on his physical strength but also on his ruthless punishments for even the slightest disrespect. He had crushed any form of rebellion before it could even begin, forcing both the town and the Marines under his command to live in fear. Among the Marines of Shell's town, there is a saying that only truly misfortunate souls get their first recruitment here in this town, under the command of Axe-Hand Morgan, crushing their dream of earning any kind of achievements in the Marine. Suddenly, the door to his office flew open, and Helmeppo burst in, clutching his nose, which was still bleeding from Luffy's punch. His face was twisted in anger and humiliation. "Father," Helmeppo whined, rushing to Morgan's side. "Some filthy pirates attacked me. They broke my nose and humiliated me in front of everyone." Morgan slowly turned to face his son, his gaze cold and indifferent. "Pirates, you say?" he asked, his voice heavy with disdain. "Yes, pirates," Helmeppo yelled. At this moment, he didn't care if the two people he had encountered in town were pirates or not. He was sure that calling them pirates would get them the most punishment. "A man and a woman. They insulted me, and when I tried to put them in their place, they. His voice trailed off as he caught sight of his father's disapproving glare. Morgan stared at him for a long moment before scoffing. "Helmeppo, you are a disgrace," he said, his words cutting through the air like a blade. "You have my name and position, yet you cannot even handle a few pirates. Pathetic," he said, his hand gliding over the blade of his axe hand. "But father, they're dangerous," Helmeppo stammered, fear creeping into his voice. "They crushed my gun like it was nothing. The man even punched me across the tavern." Morgan's eyes narrowed. A man who can crush a gun with his bare hands. His interest was piqued, but it was masked behind his ever-present arrogance. "Pirates, huh? I'll deal with these insects personally," he said, narrowing his eyes and glaring at Helmeppo with disgust. "No one disrespects my family or my authority in this town, no matter how pathetic or how much of a disappointment you are as a son." Turning to his Marines, he barked an order. "Prepare the troops, we're going to hunt these pirates down and make an example of them." "Yes, sir," the Marines responded, quickly scurrying out to follow his orders. They were pretty sure that Helmeppo must have invited trouble, but by now they were used to it. Whether it was visitors or locals of this town, they had dragged back many people to the base due to Helmeppo's mess. Although it went against their conscience to punish innocent people, they were too helpless to do anything against Captain Morgan's power and authority. Morgan's face twisted into a menacing smile as he slammed his axe hand on the table, splitting it in half. "Let's see how tough these pirates really are," he said, walking outside the office. "There goes another table." The Marines in the room thought, a bit of sweat dripping down their faces as they followed their captain outside. Helmeppo also followed close behind, smirking despite his earlier humiliation. He knew his father's power. No one ever crossed Axe-Hand Morgan and lived to tell the tale. He was sure the pirates who humiliated him were about to face the full wrath of the Marine captain. Meanwhile, following Luffy's request, Rika's mother quickly prepared a meal, but instead of staying to eat it in the tavern, Luffy decided to take the food with him. He wandered to the center of town, casually carrying the meal, and once he arrived at the crossroads, he borrowed a chair from a nearby shop. With complete ease, he sat in the middle of the busy intersection, leisurely eating as if he had all the time in the world. The people passing by shot him confused looks, unsure of what this strange young boy was up to. Gradually, those who had witnessed the earlier scene in the tavern began to gather around, whispering to others about what had transpired. Soon, the story spread, and the townspeople realized that Luffy wasn't just sitting there for no reason. He was waiting for someone, and that person being none other than the tyrant of the Shell's town, Captain Axehand Morgan. Whispers turned to murmurs, and soon, a crowd had formed at the crossroads, keeping a cautious distance from Luffy. Most of them were looking at him with expressions that ranged from disbelief to horror. Many of them had witnessed Morgan's brutality firsthand and couldn't fathom why this young man would deliberately provoke the tyrant. Does he have a death wish? That boy must be insane to sit there like that. Morgan will tear him apart. He must be new here, doesn't know what Morgan's capable of. The tension in the air was palpable, and just then, the old man who had met Luffy earlier stepped forward from the crowd, his expression a mix of concern and exasperation. "Young man," the old man began, his voice heavy with a sense of inevitability, "I warned you to keep a low profile. Yet here you are, sitting in the open, waiting for your execution." He shook his head, a tired sigh escaping his lips. "Do you have any idea what you're up against? Morgan doesn't show mercy." Luffy looked up from his food, chewing leisurely before responding, completely unbothered. "Thanks for the warning, old man, but I'm not worried about it." The old man's brows furrowed in frustration. "Not worried? You're practically inviting death by sitting here? Captain Morgan is a cruel tyrant, not some run-of-the-mill opponent. He'll kill you for defying him, no questions asked." Luffy grinned, his confidence unwavering. "Let him try. I'm not worried about Morgan. In fact, I'm waiting for him." The old man blinked in disbelief, his jaw tightening. "You're not just reckless. You're completely mad," he muttered, turning away. He knew there was no reasoning with someone who seemed so sure of themselves, but still, he couldn't help but feel pity for the young boy. In his mind, Luffy was walking straight into the lion's den. "You called me mad, old man," Luffy scoffed, taking another bite of his meal without a care. "But the truth is, it's you people who are crazy for enduring someone like Morgan for all these years." He paused, looking around at the crowd that had gathered, his gaze sharp and unapologetic. "You've endured years of pain because none of you had even the ounce the courage in your sorry asses to stand up to him." The townspeople flinched at his words, some shifting uncomfortably. A few muttered under their breath, while others shot Luffy angry looks. The old man who had spoken to him earlier clenched his fists, his frustration evident. "You think it's that simple?" the old man retorted, his voice shaky but firm. "You think we didn't try? Morgan crushed anyone who opposed him. His power. It's not something a normal person can stand against. We'd be slaughtered if we tried to fight him." Luffy wiped his mouth with the back of his hand, not even Botherahee argument. "Maybe," he said, still calm, "but that doesn't mean you roll over and accept it. You've all convinced yourselves it's impossible to fight back, and that's why nothing ever changes." The crowd around him grew restless, with more people whispering and shooting uneasy glances. Luffy's words stung. Many of them had been living under Morgan's tyranny for so long that they had forgotten what it felt like to hope for anything better. "You don't understand," another man from the crowd called out, stepping forward. "We have families. We can't risk their lives going against a marine captain. He'd kill us, and then what? Our children, our wives, what happens to them?" Luffy finally stood up from the chair, towering over his meal. His eyes locked onto the man who spoke. "You're already risking their lives by doing nothing. How much longer are you going to live in fear, watching your kids grow up under a man who'll bleed this town dry?" he asked. "How much longer before that idiot blonde son of that captain or his lackeys put their hands on one of your daughters or sisters? Are you still willing to turn a blind eye when that happens?" The weight of his words hit the crowd hard. Some looked away, ashamed, while others glared at him with defiance or disbelief. But beneath all the anger, there was an undeniable truth that the Luffy was saying what many of them had refused to admit. They had let Morgan control their lives for far too long, and now they were unsafe and scared in their own hometown. "You talk big for a stranger," the old man said, his voice quieter now. "But what happens when Morgan gets here? What will you do then, huh?" Luffy's grin widened, a spark of excitement in his eyes. "I'm gonna beat him," he said simply, as if it were the most obvious thing in the world. The crowd fell into a stunned silence. Some people gasped. Others laughed bitterly at his boldness. "You think you can beat Morgan?" someone scoffed. "You're just one guy." Luffy looked out at them, undeterred. "I don't care if he's a marine captain or the king of the world. If he's standing in my way, I'll take him down." He casually picked up another bite of food, as if fighting Morgan was just another item on his to-do list for the day. The tension hung in the air as the crowd watched Luffy with a mixture of awe, disbelief, and fear. No one had ever spoken about defying Captain Morgan so openly, and certainly not with such confidence. As Luffy continued eating, completely unfazed by the commotion around him, the townspeople found themselves questioning something they hadn't dared to before: what if he really could beat Morgan? And then, in the distance, the sound of heavy boots echoed through the streets, followed by the clanking of metal armor. Captain Morgan was here. When Captain Morgan arrived at the town center, his heavy boots thudding against the ground, he immediately noticed the large crowd gathered around a young boy sitting casually in the middle of the S. Sharp eyes narrowed as he took in the scene. Something was clearly off. The atmosphere was tense, but instead of fear, there was a different emotion in people's eyes. Emotion he couldn't grasp at the moment. Beside him, Helmeppo touched his swollen and bruised face from Luffy's punch and pointed angrily at the boy. "Father, it's him," Helmeppo screeched, his voice thick with fury and humiliation. "He's the one who broke my nose." Upon hearing his son's words, Captain Morgan scowled at the sight of Luffy. Just the townspeople also noticed his arrival, and that alone was enough to silence the whispers of the crowd, and the tension in the air grew heavier. He glared at his son, then shifted his icy gaze toward the boy who dared to defy his authority. "Is that so?" Morgan's deep, gravelly voice rumbled through the square, causing a shiver to run through the crowd. He began to step forward, his men following close behind, weapons ready, as his eyes locked onto Luffy. "You must have a death wish to strike my son." Luffy, still seated, calmly took another bite of food, showing no sign of concern. He swallowed before looking up at Morgan with a casual smile. "You must be Axe-Hand Morgan," Luffy said. "I've been waiting for you." Morgan's brow twitched in anger at the boy's disrespectful tone, his hand flexing around the massive axe that replaced his arm. "You've got guts, I'll give you that," he growled in a low and dangerous voice. "But you made the mistake of touching my son. No one crosses the me in this town and lives to tell about it." The crowd held its breath, many of them trembling, unsure whether to flee or stay and witness the inevitable clash. They had seen Morgan's wrath before, and it rarely ended without bloodshed. Luffy, on the other hand, didn't flinch. He stood up slowly, wiping his hands on his shorts, and then looked Morgan in the eyes with unshaken confidence. "I'm not scared of you," he said simply. "In fact, you are going down today, right here, in front of all these people." The crowd gasped audibly at Luffy's bold declaration. No one had ever spoken to Morgan like that, and to do so in front of the entire town was unthinkable. Morgan's face twisted into a snarl. "You're going to bring me down?" He let out a harsh, mocking laugh. "Boy, I've crushed stronger men than you with one swing of my axe. Do you really think you can defeat me?" Luffy scoffed, stretching his arms as if the whole situation was a joke. "You really believe in your own hype, don't you?" His voice was casual, but it cut deep. "If you were truly strong, you'd be deployed somewhere on the Grand Line, not stuck in this little town in East Blue." Upon hearing Luffy's words, Morgan's anger boiled over. He knew that he was no match for people who sailed the Grand Line, whether they were pirates or marines, but here in East Blue, very few people knew about them, let alone anyone on this island. That's why he could boss over these pathetic, ignorant people. But now here was this boy who was not only challenging his authority but also mocking him. No, that was not acceptable at all. "That's enough," Morgan roared, his anger boiling over. "Boys, take aim," he bellowed, pointing his axe hand toward Luffy. "I want all of you to empty your guns on that brat. Fire, all of you." The Marines, though hesitant, moved to obey. They raised their rifles and pointed them directly at Luffy. But just as they were about to fire, a small figure darted into the center of the square, blocking their line of sight. "I won't let you hurt Big Brother Luffy," Rika cried, standing in front of Luffy with her arms spread wide. Big Brother Luffy was protecting his friend. He didn't do anything wrong. The Marines froze, their fingers hovering over their triggers, unsure of what to do. The thought of firing at a little girl, even under orders, was something they couldn't stomach. No matter how many immoral acts they had carried out in service of Morgan, this was too much. Morgan, however, was unmoved. His cold eyes narrowed at his men's hesitation. "What the hell are you doing?" he bellowed, his voice dripping with malice. Were my orders not clear enough? One Marine, trembling, dared to speak up. Sir, there's a civilian child in the way. If we fire, there's a chance we might hit her by accident. And Morgan sneered, his uncaring eyes locked onto the scene. That little wretch decided to interfere in the affairs of the Marines. It's only logical that she should be executed alongside that criminal. But, sir, did I stutter? Morgan growled, lifting his massive axe in front of his face. His voice was dark and menacing. The next person who questions my orders will die a painful death. The threat of Morgan's wrath sent a shiver through the Marines. Reluctantly, they turned their rifles back toward Luffy and Rika, their hands trembling as they pointed their weapons at the two. In the crowd, Rika's mother gasped in horror, her hand flying to her mouth as tears streamed down her face. Rika, she cried, her voice filled with fear and despair. Rika's small body trembling as she saw the guns aimed at her. Her heart raced, but before she could panic, she felt a gentle hand ruffle her hair. She looked up to see Luffy smiling down at her, calm and reassuring. You're a brave girl, Rika, Luffy said softly, his voice filled with warmth, braver than most people in this town. Then, without a hint of fear, Luffy stepped in front of her, placing himself between Rika and the trembling Marines. His face turned serious as he glared at the men pointing their guns at them. I dare you to pull the trigger, Luffy challenged, his voice cold and steady. The air around him seemed to darken as he let his killing intent leak out, targeting the Marines in front of him. It was a terrifying pressure, one that made the soldiers flinch, their hands shaking as they gripped their rifles. Meanwhile, the villagers, watching Luffy stand unwavering in front of little Rika, began to feel their long-suppressed rebellious spirits ignite. For years, they had cowered in fear of Morgan, but now an outsider was risking his life to protect one of their own. How can we let an outsider risk his life to protect one of our own? A man in the crowd shouted, his voice breaking through the tension. He's right, a woman added, her voice rising above the others. We will not stand for this tyranny anymore. Yeah, we don't want Morgan here anymore, another voice cried out. One by one, voices joined in, and soon the entire town was up in arms, their collective spirit rising in defiance against the tyrant who had held them under his boot for so long. Morgan's face contorted in fury, his grip on his axe tightening until his knuckles turned white. Seeing the townspeople rebelling against him pushed him over the edge. His eyes blazed with madness. Kill them both, he bellowed, pointing furiously at Luffy and Rika. After you're done with them, fire indiscriminately at these ungrateful s. Only then will they understand the consequences of crossing me. This was it. This command that broke the camel's back. The fear that had gripped the Marines under Morgan's command vanished as they realized that Captain Morgan was essentially telling them to commit genocide on these innocent people without any cause. To them, that was not what being a Marine was about. They were supposed to be heroes who protected people from pirates, but this was truly evil. The Marines exchanged glances, each nodding in silent agreement. One by one, they lowered their guns and turned toward Morgan. Captain, we will not follow your orders anymore, the oldest Marine among them said, his voice filled with conviction. Morgan's bloodshot eyes widened in disbelief and rage as he saw his own men defying him. You dare to disobey me? He shrieked, raising his massive axe hand. I'll make an example out of you, now die. He swung his axe with all his might, aiming to kill the Marine who had spoken out, but before the blade could connect, Luffy moved. In an instant, using total concentration breathing, Luffy appeared next to the Marine and effortlessly caught Morgan's axe with his hand. However, he didn't stop there. Luffy coated his hand with haki and, in the next moment, the metal of the axe cracked and then shattered into pieces right before everyone's eyes. What? Morgan exclaimed in shock, seeing his axe shatter into pieces. How did you? Morgan began, but his words were cut off as Luffy's haki-coated fist drove into his abdomen with brutal force. The impact sent Morgan flying across the square, crashing into a nearby building with a thunderous crash. His bones cracked audibly, and when the dust settled, Morgan lay unconscious in a heap, blood trickling from his mouth and nose. The entire square fell silent, the townspeople and Marines staring in awe and disbelief. Morgan, the man who had tormented them for years, was defeated with one single punch. He did it, One of the villagers whispered, the reality of what had just happened sinking in. He really defeated Morgan, another said in awe. We're free, someone else shouted, and soon the entire town erupted in cheers, the sound of celebration echoing through the streets. We're finally free, the crowd cried, their voices full of joy and relief as they celebrated their long-awaited freedom. Suddenly, a small blur shot toward Luffy, and before he could react, little Rika crashed into his leg, hugging him tightly. Tears streamed down her cheeks as she looked up at him, her voice trembling. Big brother, you won, she exclaimed between sniffles. Luffy looked down at her with a wide grin, ruffling her hair gently. Of course I did, he said in a warm and reassuring voice. Just then a notification popped up on his screen. Congratulations! 2 new achievements unlocked, to be continued. Farewell, Shell's Town. Raphael. System. After Morgan's crushing defeat at the hands of Luffy, the Marines wasted no time. They quickly moved to arrest their fallen captain, along with Helmeppo and his lackeys. There was no hesitation this time. Morgan's reign of terror had come to an end, and the once feared Marine captain was now a prisoner, bound in chains alongside his son. Helmeppo, still nursing his injuries from earlier, whined and pleaded, but his cries fell on deaf ears. The people of Shell's Town, and even the Marines who had served under Morgan's tyranny, felt no sympathy for the disgraced captain and his son. As the Marines led Morgan, Helmeppo, and the lackeys away, the mood in the town shifted dramatically. The dark cloud that had loomed over Shell's Town for years had finally lifted. People began to gather in the streets, their faces lighting up with joy and relief. A sense of freedom washed over them, and soon, plans for a spontaneous town-wide celebration were in full swing. Luffy, standing near the square where he had faced Morgan, watched the Marines drag the tyrant away, a satisfied grin on his face. Around him, the townspeople were busy setting up tables, decorating the streets, and preparing food. The once quiet and fearful town had come alive with laughter, cheers, and music. Villagers approached Luffy, offering their thanks and praise. You saved us from him. We're in your debt, one man exclaimed, shaking Luffy's hand vigorously. You're a hero, a woman said, her eyes shining with gratitude. We were too afraid to stand up to him, but you showed us we didn't have to be. Luffy, as always, played it off with a grin. Nah, I'm not a hero. I'm just a guy doing whatever I want, he said casually, though the people of the town still looked at him with revered gazes. It was clear that his actions had inspired the entire town to stand up for their own freedom. As the celebration kicked into full gear, food and drinks flowed freely. Rika's mother, who had nearly lost her daughter to Morgan's cruelty, worked alongside the other villagers to prepare a grand feast. She made sure that Luffy, the one who had saved Rika, was well taken care of. Rika, meanwhile, stuck close to Luffy, her eyes gleaming with admiration as she proudly told anyone who would listen about how he had defeated Morgan. A short while later, Uta joined in the celebrations, having completed whatever task Luffy had entrusted to her. She walked up to him with a smirk, nudging his shoulder. Looks like you managed to wrap things up without any problems. Yeah, it wasn't too bad, Luffy replied with a grin, taking a huge bite out of the food in front of him. How about you? How did things go on your end? With you attracting all the attention, my mission was smooth as butter, Uta said while stealing a piece of meat from Luffy's plate. I gotta say though, Uta glanced around at the celebrating townspeople, the music, and the smiling faces. You've certainly changed the mood around this place. They just needed a push, Luffy shrugged. People can be strong when their desire for freedom outweighs their fear. Well said, boy, a new, feminine voice interrupted their conversation. Luffy and Uta turned to see a tall, slim woman with fair skin and short purple hair standing behind them. She wore black-framed sunglasses with red lenses and clothes that left little to the imagination. What the hell is Bellow Betty doing here? Luffy thought as he stared at the woman in front of him. No, now is not the time to get surprised. I need to get away from here. Away from the public's eyes. We can't be seen associating with her. We're not ready for that kind of attention yet. Miss, let's talk somewhere else, Luffy said abruptly, grabbing Uta's arm and leading her away without waiting for a response. Bellow Betty followed them, an amused smirk playing on her lips. Luffy, do you know her? Uta asked, glancing back at the woman trailing behind them. Not personally, Luffy replied, continuing to walk until they were on a hill outside the town. Well, I think we are quite far away from the town, so are you ready to talk now? Betty asked, folding her arms under her chest. Of course, we can talk, Bellow Betty, commander of the East Army from the Revolutionary Army, Luffy said with a grin on his face. Betty froze for a moment, clearly taken aback by Luffy's knowledge of her. But she quickly regained her composure, scrutinizing him from behind her sunglasses. Lighting a cigarette, she asked, "You know quite a lot about me, don't you? Even my bounty poster doesn't mention anything about me being a commander. Care to share how you know that?" "Sorry, I can't tell you my sources," Luffy said, casually shrugging his shoulder. "But I'm not a threat to you or your cause. If you don't believe me, ask Big Bear. He can vouch for me." "Oh, you know the big guy?" Betty raised an eyebrow, intrigued. "Yeah, long story," Luffy replied, rubbing the back of his head. "So, what brings a Revolutionary Army commander to such a small island in the East Blue?" "Before we get to that, let me congratulate you on freeing this town from that tyrant Morgan," Betty said, patting Luffy on the shoulder. "Honestly, I was here for that very same reason, but you achieved that result far more quickly and even reignited the fighting spirit of this town's people. Thanks for your praise, but just like I told the people of this town, I defeated Morgan because he and his son messed with me and my friend, nothing more, nothing less," Luffy said, once again dismissing the praise as he really didn't want to be paraded as a hero. "Hero or not, what you did was impressive," Betty said, taking a drag from her cigarette. "You've got a natural talent for leadership. That's why I'm here to offer you both a place in the Revolutionary Army." Upon hearing Betty's offer, Luffy and Uda exchanged a glance, but they already knew their answer. "I appreciate the offer, but I have to decline," Luffy replied. "As I said, what happened here was just an accident and not a deliberate plan to save this town. Besides, right now, I just want to travel the seas and explore the mysteries of the world." "Same here," Uda added. "I love my freedom too much to work under anyone." Betty sighed in disappointment. "Well, that's a shame. You two would have made excellent additions to our ranks." She reached into her pocket and handed Luffy a small piece of paper. "Here's my Dendenmushi number. If you ever change your mind or find yourself in a similar situation, give me a call." "Sure, I'll keep it in mind," Luffy said, accepting the paper. "Well then, it was great meeting you two, but I have to leave now. I've got other places to be," Betty said with a wave, walking away and disappearing into the distance. Once she was gone, Uda let out a sigh. "Luffy, it hasn't even been a month since we started our journey, and we're already running into big shots from the Grand Line." Luffy chuckled, draping an arm over her shoulder. "Get used to it. I've got a feeling this is going to be a regular thing." With that, the two of them headed back to town, bickering playfully as they rejoined the celebration which lasted well into the night. The next afternoon, as the sun hung high in the sky, Luffy and Uda stood on their boat, making the final preparations to set sail once more. Earlier that morning, while they enjoyed breakfast at Rika's mother's tavern, a group of Marines led by Ripper, the temporary base commander, had approached them with a request. Though they were grateful for Luffy and Uda's help in freeing the town from Morgan's tyranny, they had politely asked them to leave the town as soon as possible. "You understand, don't you?" Ripper said, standing awkwardly in front of their table. "Word will spread that Morgan's been defeated, and it won't be long before other Marine officers arrive to investigate. We don't want any trouble, especially with higher-ups. They may not look kindly on what's happened here, even if it was justified." Luffy, unfazed as always, had simply grinned food into his mouth. "Yeah, I get it. Don't worry, we were planning to leave soon anyway." Ripper, visibly relieved, had bowed slightly. "Thank you. The townspeople will always remember what you've done. And, as a gesture of our gratitude, we'll keep your names out of the official report." By the afternoon, they were back on their boat, ready to head out on their next adventure. Some townspeople had gathered to load crates of fruits and supplies as a parting gift, prepared by Rika's mother, and others as a show of their gratitude. One of the townsmen loading the crates looked at Luffy, who was humming to himself and clearly excited about the journey ahead. "You're taking this pretty well," the man remarked, raising an eyebrow. Most people wouldn't be so chill after being asked to leave a town they just saved. Luffy shrugged, still grinning. "It's not like we were planning to stay forever. Besides, there's so much more to see out there." Uda, who was adjusting the sails, chuckled, shaking her head. Don't think about it too much. There are very few things that bother this guy. Just then, a familiar small voice called out from the docks. Big brother Luffy, big sister Uda. They both turned to see Rika running toward them, her little arms waving excitedly. Behind her, more townspeople were gathering to say their goodbyes. Wait! Rika called, finally reaching the edge of the dock, out of breath but smiling brightly. I just wanted to say thank you, again. And I made something for you. She held out a small charm, handmade from seashells, tied together with a simple string. For good luck on your journey. Luffy knelt down and took the charm with his usual wide grin. Thanks, Rika, I'll keep this safe, he said, immediately tying it around his neck. Uda smiled and ruffled the girl's hair. Take care of your mom, okay? I will. Rika nodded enthusiastically, her eyes sparkling with emotion. I promise, and when I get older, I'll be strong like you. Luffy and Uda shared a fond look before stepping back onto their boat. Alright, let's go, Luffy shouted, pushing the boat off the dock. As the boat drifted away from the shore, the townspeople waved and cheered, their voices carrying across the water. Rika stood at the very edge of the dock, waving with both hands, watching as her heroes sailed off into the horizon. As Shellstown disappeared from view, Luffy and Uda shared a glance. It was a fun little adventure, huh? Luffy said, smiling at her. Yeah, Uda grinned back. Unexpected, but definitely fun. Luffy leaned back, stretching his arms. So, Uda, how about showing me the spoils from your mission? Uda's grin widened into something more mischievous. Oh, I thought you'd never ask, she said with a teasing tone. Come on, follow me. She led Luffy into the cabin of their boat, where she had stashed everything she'd acquired. Inside, Luffy's eyes widened as he saw the haul. A pile of treasure, 3 Den Den Mushis, 2 sets of marine uniforms, and a giant map of East Blue. Well done, Uda, Luffy said, sounding genuinely impressed. You got quite the haul from Shellstown's marine base. Thanks, Uda replied with a proud grin. I had to make a few trips between the base and the boat, but it was definitely worth it. You're right, Luffy agreed, placing the treasure into his inventory, except for the map of East Blue, which he kept out for immediate use. Raphael, analyze the Den Den Mushi and integrate one of them with my smartphone, Luffy instructed mentally. Nodding to himself, Luffy spread the large map of East Blue on the table, looking at the various islands marked on it. So, Uda, what do you think? He asked, glancing at her. Where should we go next? Uda leaned over, staring intently at the map for a moment. Her finger traced over a few locations before settling on a specific island. I think we should go here, she said, tapping a spot. It's the closest to where we are now. Are you sure? Luffy asked, peering at the map. Yep, Uda nodded with confidence. Alright then, Luffy grinned, rolling up the map. Let's set sail for Orangetown. To be continued. Tour de force, Raphael. Raphael. System. It had been a week since Luffy and Uda had departed from Shellstown, leisurely sailing toward Orangetown. During this time, Raphael had already finished analyzing and integrating one of the 3 Den Den Mushi that Uda had stolen from the Shellstown Marine base into Luffy's smartphone. Now, thanks to Raphael's efforts, Luffy could use his phone to contact other Den Den Mushi, allowing him to mimic the call function from their previous world. Now with a week's worth of food stored neatly in his inventory and no immediate threat or exciting event in sight, Luffy found himself lazing about on the boat. His arms were folded behind his head, eyes half-lidded as he stared at the clear blue sky. Boredom was slowly creeping in, causing him to stretch out and yawn every so often. Suddenly, a thought struck him like a bolt of lightning, causing him to sit up abruptly, eyes wide with realization. I'm an idiot, he shouted, startling Uda, who glanced over with a confused expression. How could I forget? Luffy cursed himself mentally. I completely forgot about the 2 achievements I got for beating Morgan. Shaking off his embarrassment, he quickly pulled up his system interface to check the rewards he'd received for defeating Captain Axe-Hand Morgan. Axe-Hand Slayer. The achievement is granted to an individual who has defeated the tyrant Marine Captain, Axe-Hand, Morgan. Reward: 1,000 points. The Liberator. The achievement is granted to the individual who has liberated or helped to liberate a small town. Reward: 1,000 points. A grin spread across Luffy's face. 2,000 points. That means 2 rolls. He rubbed his hands together, eyes gleaming with anticipation. Opening up the points menu, he saw his current balance. 3,010 points. Even better, I've got enough for 3 rolls thanks to those extra 700 points from and the journey begins achievement. Without wasting another second, Luffy eagerly initiated the first roll. Congratulations. Electra's twin sigh received. Luffy sighed as the weapon materialized in his inventory. It wasn't useless, but it wasn't exactly what he needed either. Well, at least it's not a total dud, he thought, trying to stay positive. I can always keep it for a collection or maybe find some use for it later. He quickly brushed aside his mild disappointment and went for the second roll. Congratulations. Chloranthy Ring X1 received. As soon as Luffy read the name of the second reward, his eyes widened in surprise. Is this what I think it is? He thought, quickly examining the ring. Chloranthy Ring. The Chloranthy Ring is an artifact from the Dark Souls series. According to lore, this ancient ring is named for its decorative green blossom, but its luster has long faded. Effect: increases stamina recovery and resiliency recovery speed by 30%. Yes! Luffy practically shouted, pumping his fist into the air. His sudden outburst drew Uda's attention. Luffy? Uda raised an eyebrow at his excitement. Don't worry, I'll tell you later, he called back, too engrossed in his new prize to explain just yet. Reaching into his inventory, Luffy carefully pulled out the Chloranthy ring. The old artifact looked simple yet captivating, a circular band adorned with green gemstones that formed a delicate floral pattern. At the center sat a faded, lusterless pearl, its once vibrant shine long gone. Despite its age, the ring radiated a subtle energy. After admiring the ring for a moment longer, Luffy slipped it onto his finger, immediately feeling its effects. This is huge, Luffy thought, grinning wide. My diamond head abilities eat away my stamina while using them, so having equipment that increases my stamina recovery is a huge find, he thought. And having a resiliency recovery on top of that is a huge plus in itself since full body transformation will eat away my resiliency instead of stamina. Then, curbing his excitement a little, he moved on to the next and final roll of the day. However, knowing his system, he didn't hold out much hope for any good reward. And if he was being honest, he was already satisfied with the ring, so without holding any greed in his mind, he just did the roll. However, the moment the name of the reward flashed across the screen, his eyes widened, and he shot up from where he sat. This. Luffy's grin stretched wider than even before. Uda, get over here, quick. Hearing the urgency in his voice, Uda rushed over with a serious expression, scanning their surroundings for threats. Luffy, what is it? Did you spot an enemy? Nah, nothing like that, Luffy said, waving off her concern. Sorry for yelling, I shouldn't have freaked you out. He rubbed the back of his head sheepishly. Anyway, do you remember when I told you I'd give you something good once my devil fruit gave me something suitable for you? Yeah, but you already gave me this outfit, didn't you? Uda raised an eyebrow. Gesturing to the clothes she was wearing, a sleek, practical outfit gifted to her not long ago. Luffy grinned wider. Who said that offer was one time only? I got something else I think you'll like. He reached into his inventory and pulled out a sleek, black devil fruit. Its surface covered in intricate, mechanical golden lines. He offered it to her with a knowing smile. A devil fruit? Uda blinked in surprise. Her voice was hesitant, uncertainty clear on her face. I don't know about this one, Luffy. Eating one is a huge commitment, Luffy. You know that. No, this devil fruit is not like the ones you find in the world. Luffy reassured her. This one here is created by my devil fruit, which does not take away your ability to swim nor does it stop you from eating multiple of them. Multiple devil fruits. Uda repeated those words and widened her eyes as she realized something. Your ability to get these random things as well as those crystal thingy is due to this? Yep. Luffy nodded with a grin. Then his grin faded, replaced with a more serious expression. Uda, you know I'd never do anything to harm you, right? Of course, Luffy, Uda replied without hesitation, her trust in him absolute. She looked at the fruit in his hands, contemplating it for a moment before finally taking it. But I swear, if I turn into some stupid animal, you're going to be the first thing I eat. Luffy laughed, but Uda remained serious as she took a bite of the fruit. Surprisingly, it didn't taste as terrible as the legend said. But before she could think too much about it, a strange tingling sensation coursed through her left arm. Her arm began to glow faintly, the light outlining intricate patterns. When the glow faded, Uda's left arm was covered in golden mechanical lines that looked almost like circuits integrated into her skin. Her palm had 2 concentric circles, resembling a high-tech mechanism. Uda stared at her hand with wide eyes and then turned towards Luffy, asking, "Luffy, what is—" Her words were cut off when suddenly the knowledge about her new powers and the memories of the person to whom these powers originally belonged to filled her head. Once the process was done, Uda was panting with her hands on her knees. "Damn, this is one hell of a ruthless guy," Uda muttered to herself. After a moment to process it all, Uda's shock turned to exhilaration. She threw her arms around Luffy, pulling him into a tight hug. "Luffy, thank you so much." She kissed him on the cheek, tightening the hug even more. Luffy laughed with her, returning the hug. He understood her reaction perfectly. After all, the devil fruit he had given her wasn't just any fruit. The reward he'd received from his third role was a custom devil fruit. Kiera no Mi, model. Chamber, based on the abilities of the expert French marksman from Valorant, Chamber. If he were being honest, Luffy had been tempted to eat the fruit himself. But in the end, he realized that he couldn't do everything on his own. Building a strong crew would only strengthen him in the long run, and a markswoman like Uda was the perfect fit for this power. With renewed determination, her eyes gleaming. "We're stopping at the next island we see. Orange Town can wait. I need to test out these new powers as soon as possible." Luffy couldn't help but chuckle at her enthusiasm. "Your wish is my command, my lady," he said with an exaggerated bow, causing both of them to burst out laughing. The next day, somewhere around noon, Luffy and Uda finally managed to spot a small uninhabited island and immediately steered their boat toward it. Once they had anchored the boat securely, they jumped ashore, eager to test Uda's new powers. "Alright, Uda, here's the plan," Luffy said, clapping his hands. "Show me everything you've got with those new powers, and then we can talk about how best to use them, and if there's anything that needs tweaking." "Got it," Uda replied, stretching out her limbs to loosen up. "Raphael, give me a detailed analysis of her abilities as she uses them," Luffy instructed internally. "Notice. Understood, master." "Okay, so I've got 4 abilities from that devil fruit," Uda explained. "One is a touch-based status effect. One is short-range teleportation, and the other 2 are for weapon materialization." Luffy nodded, listening carefully. "Sounds good. Let's start with the status effect and teleportation before we dive into the weapons." "Sure," Uda said and held up her left hand, palm open towards Luffy's face. "This is the first one," she explained, as the 2 concentric circles on her palm began glowing with a faint purple hue. Without warning, she reached forward and tapped Luffy. The moment her hand touched him, Luffy's body felt like it was submerged in thick syrup. His movements were drastically slowed down, but only for a couple of seconds. He blinked as he regained control, feeling a strange aftereffect. "That was weird," Luffy admitted, shaking off the sluggish sensation. "Right? It's called trademark touch. I can slow anything I touch for a couple of seconds," Uda explained with a grin, as a detailed explanation of the ability appeared in Luffy's mind. Trademark touch is a modified version of trademark slow trap. This ability allows the user to slow down any individual with the touch of their palm for 2 seconds. It has a cooldown time of 30 seconds after each use. They experimented with it a bit more, Uda tagging Luffy at different moments as they brainstormed how it could be used effectively in combat. The short duration seemed limiting, but in the heat of battle, a well-timed slow could be devastating. With that out of the way, they moved on to the next ability. "Okay, so this next one is really cool, watch this," Uda said as the fingers of her left hand started glowing. The next moment, a teal-colored card appeared in her hand. Then with a quick flick of her wrist, she sent the card sailing through the air, embedding it into the wooden wall of their boat's cabin. Then she repeated the process from before, summon another teal-colored card and this time embedding it in a nearby tree. She looked at Luffy and smiled. "Now, watch this," she said before snapping her fingers. Yellow mechanical lines enveloped her, and in the blink of an eye, she disappeared from her spot and reappeared on the boat. A moment later, she snapped her fingers again and returned to Luffy's side. Teleportation, huh? Not bad at all, Luffy said, sounding impressed as another panel of information appeared in his head. Rendezvous is an ability that allows the user to teleport between two designated points within a 500-meter radius by expanding stamina. Only 2 teleportation points can be active at a time. To set new points, the existing 2 must be recalled or destroyed. After each teleportation, there is a 1-minute cooldown before making another jump. If a teleportation point is destroyed, a 1-hour cooldown is required before setting new points. Hey, Uta, I have a question, Luffy said, rubbing his chin. Can your ability teleport other people too, or is it just you? Huh. Good question, Uta said, grabbing Luffy's hand. Let's find out, she said and snapped her fingers. To their delight, she managed to teleport Luffy along with her, and now both of them were standing on the boat. Great, you can actually teleport people with you, Luffy grinned, then turned towards Uta and frowned. Uta, are you okay? Yeah, I'm okay. Just give me a minute, Uta said as she drank an entire mug of water. Apparently, teleporting others with me requires twice the amount of stamina I need to transport myself, Uta said, glancing at Luffy. I guess I need to start learning total concentration breathing again. Yeah, that would be good for you since it increases your natural stamina and helps to reduce stamina consumption, Luffy said, nodding at her suggestion. Once she was rested, they returned to the beach, ready to test Uta's third ability. Okay, so as I said before, the last 2 abilities are weapons that I can materialize, she said as the 2 concentric circles on her palms glowed golden instead of purple. In the next moment, a sleek pistol with glowing golden intricate patterns and a white handle appeared in Uta's hand. Headhunter. The Headhunter ability equips the user with a highly accurate pistol with 8 shots. The Headhunter uses energy-based ammunition with substantial piercing power. After firing 8 shots, the pistol takes 30 seconds to recharge. This baby is Headhunter, Uta said, showing off the pistol with childlike excitement. Yeah, it does look cool, Luffy said and then set up targets for Uta to test her pistol on. Here, give it a try. Uta nodded as she took aim and fired Headhunter. True to her skill, she destroyed 8 targets with ease without breaking a sweat. As she fired, Luffy observed how the glow on the gun faded with each shot until it completely disappeared on the 8th shot. After 30 seconds, the glow returned, indicating that the gun was reloaded. Luffy shared his observation with Uta, who nodded along. The pistol is good but kind of too loud, don't you think? Luffy asked. I mean, if at any point we're relying on my abilities, any hope for stealth is long gone, Uta dryly remarked. True, Luffy nodded as they moved on to Uta's 4th and last ability. This time, the mechanical tattoos on Uta's entire left arm glowed, and she swiped 2 fingers over her arm, materializing a futuristic-looking sniper rifle with a sleek, angular design. It had a similar design and color scheme to Headhunter, with the only difference being the purple and black accents all over its body. 3 holographic sights floated above it in a single line, giving it increased accuracy compared to traditional snipers. Tour de Force. The Tour de Force ability equips the user with a highly accurate sniper rifle with 8 shots. The Tour de Force utilizes energy-based ammunition with extremely high piercing power. After firing 8 shots, the rifle takes 1 minute to recharge. This, Uta declared dramatically, is Tour de Force, and it's officially the love of my life. Good for you, Luffy laughed while shaking his head. So, want to give it a try? He asked, and Uta rapidly nodded her head. Well, in that case, go and find a good vantage point while I set up targets for you. Uta didn't need to be asked twice. She raced off into the woods, eager to find a perfect vantage point while Luffy prepared targets for her. This time, however, he coated some of the targets with green crystals from his own ability, wondering how Uta's new ability would fare against his crystals. Once he finished setting up the targets, he walked back and stood at a safe distance before firing a spare gun into the air, signaling to Uta that the targets were ready. Moments later, the booming sound of her sniper rifle echoed across the forest, and Luffy could see the energy from her shots rip through each target. Once Uta stopped firing, Luffy examined the targets, especially the ones he had coated with his crystals, and found that Uta's new gun had pierced through his crystal coating from one end to another. "Damn, Luffy muttered, admiring the damage. No wonder the devs kept nerfing this guy, patch after patch. Uta returned from her sniper's perch, a satisfied smile on her face. They spent the next hour or so experimenting with her abilities, playing out different combat scenarios, and testing combinations between her powers and Luffy's own. The sun was beginning to set when their training was abruptly interrupted. Both Luffy and Uta froze, their observation haki picking up the presence of two humans, unconscious and drifting toward the island on the sea. Uta and Luffy shared a glance and quickly ran towards the shore, seeing the silhouettes of two people in the sea. Without wasting any time, both Uta and Luffy dove into the water, pulling the floating figures to safety. Then, when Luffy pulled his wet hair back and cleaned the water out of his eyes, he glanced toward the two people they had just rescued and his eyes widened as he recognized who they were. Interesting. Luffy muttered to himself as he took in the familiar faces. The green-haired man was unmistakably Roronoa Zoro, and lying beside him, unconscious but breathing, was another figure Luffy knew shouldn't be alive but miraculously was, just like Rouge. This was none other than Shimotsuki Kuina, Zoro's childhood friend who was supposed to have died years ago. Luffy stood over them, wiping his face dry, thoughts racing. Coincidence, or fate? He mused, though a grin soon crept across his face. Whatever the reason, things were about to get a whole lot more interesting. To be continued. Kuina and Zoro, Raphael. System. Zoro groaned as he stirred, the rough grains of sand pressing against his skin. Slowly, he opened his eyes and for a moment, his mind was sluggish, trying to piece together the events that led to this point. And then, like a sharp blade cutting through the fog of his thoughts, the memory of what had happened hit him. He shot upright, his body tense as his gaze swept across the shoreline. Panic surged through his chest as he scanned the area. "Kuina!" he shouted internally, his eyes darting everywhere for any sign of his childhood friend. When he finally turned around, relief washed over him. There she was, sitting by a small campfire, shivering slightly despite being wrapped in a thick blanket. Her dark blue hair, damp from the sea, clung to her face. She looked cold, but safe. However, what drew Zoro's attention next were the two unfamiliar figures sitting nearby. The first was a boy, younger than Zoro, sporting a wide grin and wearing a straw hat on his head. The second was a girl with eye-catching white and red hair, adorned with strange tattoos that snaked up the left side of her body. "Kuina, what is going on here?" Zoro barked, his voice cutting through the sound of crackling flames as he stomped over to her. His eyes flicked suspiciously toward the strangers. "And who are these people?" The boy with the straw hat stood up, beaming. "I'm Luffy," he said with a carefree grin. "And this is my friend Uta." He gestured toward the red and white-haired girl, who gave a small nod in acknowledgement. Zoro narrowed his eyes, but before he could respond, Kuina shot him a sharp glare. "Stop being rude, idiot. They're the ones who saved us from drowning." Her tone was harsh and her eyes flashed with annoyance. "In case you forgot, we're in this mess because of your terrible sense of direction." "Hey, it's not my fault we got caught in that whirlpool," Zoro retorted, his voice rising in defense. "And for the record, I'm not bad with directions." "Oh, right. So it was my fault?" Kuina snapped, her voice laced with sarcasm. She stood up from her spot by the fire, fists clenched at her sides. "I was rowing the boat. You were supposed to be on the lookout for trouble, but instead, you were probably napping like always." "I was not," Zoro growled, glaring back at her, "and I said it wasn't my fault." Meanwhile, on the side, Luffy and Uta were watching their banter with amused expressions on their faces. Especially Luffy, for whom Kuina was quite a wild card since he had no idea how her personality would be outside of her childhood. Putting his amusement aside, Luffy observed the two bickering people. Zoro, to his eyes, looked exactly like he looked in the pre-time skip manga and anime. A lean man with little muscle and green hair. Kuina, on the other hand, was totally different from what he had imagined she would look like. Kuina, in front of him, had short dark blue hair, barely reaching past her ear. She was taller than Zoro and had a muscular build evident by her muscular arms visible due to her attire, which consisted of a sleeveless turtleneck and pants. If Luffy was being honest with himself, this version of Kuina reminded him of a certain female character from the anime he had watched in his previous life. Their heated argument was starting to escalate when a dry voice cut through the tension. "Are you two done?" Uda asked, her eyebrow raised in annoyance. She crossed her arms, clearly not entertained by their bickering. Both Zoro and Kuina fell silent, exchanging a glance before grudgingly sitting back down by the fire. Luffy, who had been watching with a grin, slid a crate of fruits toward them. "Here, eat something," he offered casually. "Might help calm your heads down." Kuina was about to politely decline. "No, thank you. We already." But her words trailed off as she saw Zoro already reaching for an apple. "Zoro?" she hissed, her eyes narrowing at him. "What?" Zoro replied innocently, biting into the apple he offered. He shrugged, entirely unbothered by her glare. Kuina could only sigh in exasperation, reluctantly grabbing a fruit for herself. "Thank you," she said, her voice softer this time as she glanced at Luffy and Uda. "For this. And for saving us from the sea. We owe you," she said while Uda and Luffy nodded acknowledgement. Then after a long stretch of silence, Luffy leaned forward, breaking the quiet with a curious question. "So, what's your story?" he asked, his eyes twinkling with interest. "How'd you two end up here?" That came out of nowhere. Kuina raised her brow. "Why do you want to know?" she asked skeptically. "Not exactly something we share with strangers." "I am just saying," Luffy shrugged. "I mean, since you don't have a way to get out of this island on your own, you are stuck here until Uda and I decide to leave this place. So since we are stuck with one another anyway, might as well get to know each other, right?" "Wow, your excuses are almost as bad as this idiot's sense of direction," Kuina scoffed, jerking her thumb toward Zoro, who glared at her in response. She turned back to Luffy. "Fine, but if you want our story, you should start with yours." Luffy shrugged and began to tell his life story, carefully omitting key details about important figures like Garp and Shanks. Uda occasionally chimed in, adding tidbits from her own perspective as she grew up with him and didn't feel any need to narrate her own story separately. He continued talking for half an hour, eventually recounting his defeat of Morgan and how it led him to this island for training. "That was our story. Now it's your turn," Luffy said. "I'm going to become the greatest swordsman in the world," Zoro said as he was already halfway through his 10th apple. He then continued wiping his mouth. "After that, I have to go to Wano and reclaim my family's honor." "Wano?" Uda repeated, her interest piqued as she remembered hearing that name from Shanks before. "You're related to that place?" "Yeah, apparently my family used to be a big shot from some place called Wano." Zoro leaned back, a hint of indifference in his voice. "Apparently 20 years ago, something happened that forced my grandfather to flee Wano. A few years ago, on his deathbed, he had made me promise that once I achieved my dream, I would go to Wano to reclaim my family's honor or something." "Huh, interesting," Luffy thought as he heard Zoro's words. In the manga, Zoro had a minor connection to Wano, but the main story never explored it. It seems it's going to be different here. "Cool," Luffy said before turning his gaze toward Kuina. "What about you? You want to be the greatest swordswoman too?" Kuina's expression darkened. "No," she replied, her voice heavy with bitterness. "According to my old man, women can't be the strongest with a sword." Her fists clenched tightly. "So I'm going to piss on that belief of his and prove him wrong. Instead of just mastering one single weapon, I'll become a master of every weapon I can find. The greatest weapon master on the seas." Uda blinked in surprise. "That's quite a goal," she said, impressed. "How many weapons have you mastered so far?" Kuina smirked. "The polearm is my best weapon. After I swore never to touch a sword again, I picked it up. I've got decent aim with a bow, and I know my way around guns and daggers. That's all for now, I guess, since I haven't come across anything unique so far." Then a few more minutes of idle chatter. Luffy decided to ask something he wanted to ask for a while. "So, what are you two going to do next?" he asked, his gaze shifting between Kuina and Zoro. "I mean, we're heading to Orangetown tomorrow. We can drop you there, but what's your plan after that?" Both Kuina and Zoro exchanged uncertain glances, realizing that neither of them had money or a means of transportation once they separated from the two people in front of them. Kuina let out a long sigh and frowned slightly, locking eyes with Luffy. "What exactly are you trying to say?" she asked, her voice edged with suspicion. "Get to the sea, both of you don't have much going on right now. Why don't you join Uta and me on our ship?" Luffy grinned, leaning back as if what he had just said was the most natural thing in the world. The moment the words left his mouth, Zoro immediately shook his head. "Nah, we're good," he replied bluntly. "We don't want to become pirates. Geez, we haven't even hoisted a flag yet, and people are already calling us pirates." Uta, sitting a little to the side, raised an eyebrow and spoke in a dry, sarcastic tone. "Oh, please. Anyone who doesn't align themselves with the world government or Marines' beliefs will be labeled a criminal sooner or later. And you two won't be any different," Luffy chuckled, though there was a knowing glint in his eyes. "The moment you start making a name for yourselves, you'll be forced to choose. Either join them or be hunted down until you're impelled down or at the bottom of the sea." Kuina crossed her arms, her brows furrowed in skepticism. "You seem to know a lot about these things for someone your age," she remarked, not fully believing Luffy's words. Luffy just shrugged, a cryptic smile playing at the corners of his lips. "Yeah, I do," he said simply, without offering any further explanation. "But don't worry, the way you are now, they won't even bother looking your way. You're not worth their attention or effort yet." Suddenly, both Zoro and Kuina's expressions darkened. Their eyes narrowed dangerously as they glared at Luffy. "Are you trying to call us weak?" Kuina's voice had an unmistakable edge of anger to it as her pride stung at the insult. Luffy met their glares head-on, completely unfazed. "I'm not trying to say anything," he replied matter-of-factly. "I'm saying you're weak right now. The way you are now, you'd have a hard time surviving on the first half of the Grand Line. That's why I'm inviting you two to join my crew," Luffy offered, making his intentions clear without sugarcoating his words. "I see potential in both of you, and I've got resources that can help you grow. With your skills and a little help from me, you could reach heights that would take most people years to achieve." Kuina and Zoro sat in silence for a moment, processing Luffy's words. They exchanged another glance, both weighing the offer, but before either of them could respond, Kuina broke the silence. "What kind of resources are you talking about?" she asked cautiously. Luffy grinned. "Instead of telling you, why don't I show you?" His eyes gleamed with mischief as he stood up, brushing the sand from his pants. "Let's make a bet. Tomorrow, I'll take both of you on in a 2-on-1 fight. If you win, I'll give you enough money to buy a boat and set you on your way. But if I win..." His grin widened. "You both join my crew." Zoro's eyebrow twitched at the suggestion, but before he could refuse, Kuina spoke up. "I take that bet," she said, "but I don't have my weapon. It got lost somewhere in the sea." "Oh, I can help you with that," Luffy said, reaching behind him and, with a swift motion, producing a pair of shining weapons. Two beautifully crafted sai glinted in the firelight as he tossed them toward Kuina. "Here, you can use these." Zoro's eyes widened in disbelief as he watched the weapons appear seemingly out of thin air. "How the hell did you do that?" he exclaimed. Luffy waved him off casually. "Don't worry about it. It's just one of my abilities," he said with a dismissive shrug. Then he turned back to Kuina, who was already inspecting the sai with clear interest. "They're called sai," Luffy explained. "Get familiar with them and use them against me tomorrow." "Are you sure you want to give these to me?" she asked, her voice laced with genuine surprise, though her eyes never left the sai in her hand. "They look brand new, like they've just been forged." "Yeah, I don't mind," Luffy shrugged again with a smile. "Neither Uta nor I have any use for them. And even if I lose tomorrow, you can keep them. Consider it a gift for going along with my little challenge." Kuina glanced up at him, and for a moment her expression softened. "Thank you," she said in a sincere voice. "I'll take good care of them." Luffy nodded, then turned to Zoro. "What about you? Lose anything important to the sea?" "Yeah, one of my swords," Zoro said, rubbing the back of his head. Honestly, Zoro was just glad that the sword he lost in the sea was just an ordinary sword he had picked up from some pirate they had killed for bounty and not Wado Ichimonji, his main sword that had been entrusted to him by his master to carry on his legacy. "But it's not a problem. I can still use two swords equally proficiently." Luffy shook his head. "No, that won't do," he said, and once again produced a weapon from thin air. This time it was a katana that he had received after his encounter with Madwoman Emu. Here, use this. Although this isn't as unique as the sai that I gave to Kuina, I think it will do the trick, he said, handing the sword to Zoro. Zoro took the sword from Luffy's hand, inspected it, and came to the conclusion that the sword in his hand right now was leagues better than the one he had lost. Then he looked at Luffy and couldn't help but ask, "What kind of pirate are you?" "Huh? What do you mean?" Luffy asked, sounding genuinely confused. "Don't play dumb," Zoro snapped at him. "This sword's worth at least 15,000 berries, and you're just handing it out like it's nothing." "Wow, I didn't know it was that expensive," Luffy muttered to himself, which only enraged Zoro even more. How was I supposed to know that this sword would be worth so much? The description said it was just a regular katana without any special effects. Notice. Master, the prizes that the system bestows upon you are always of the best possible quality for any said item. However, for the system that could possibly conjure any time from the omniverse, a good quality regular sword is comparable to a toothpick. Makes sense. Luffy nodded to himself before addressing Zoro. Listen, I don't know why you're getting angry, neither do I care. Just tell me if you want this sword or not. Zoro growled, but then sighed, knowing it wasn't worth getting worked up over. Fine, I'll take it, he muttered. Better me than you giving it to some idiot who doesn't know its value. Luffy grinned. Great, now get some rest. Tomorrow's going to be a big day. For you too, at least. He gave them a cheeky smile before heading back toward the boat, Uda trailing behind him. Good luck, Uda called over her shoulder. You're going to need it. As Luffy and Uda disappeared into the darkness, Zoro turned to Kuina. What do you think? Kuina looked down at the sai in her hands, a small smile tugging at her lips. They seem like good people, she said thoughtfully. As for the bet, I'm not sure. I haven't seen Luffy fight yet. Well, he does look fairly strong for someone of his age, but I couldn't see where his confidence is coming from, Zoro said, folding his arms across his chest. Neither do I, but don't underestimate him. There has to be some source behind his confidence, and we don't want to get off guard, Kuina warned Zoro. Now let's sleep. I have to get up early tomorrow and practice these sweet new weapons, she said, starting to head towards Luffy's boat as Zoro followed behind her. To be continued. Luffy vs. Kuina and Zoro, Raphael. System. The following contest is scheduled for one fall and is a handicap match. Uda's voice rang out dramatically, her hands cupped around her mouth as she acted as the impromptu announcer. She pointed toward Luffy, who stood confidently in the sand. On the left, we have the champion, hailing from Fuchsia Village. Monkey D. Luffy, she called, as Luffy raised his hand, grinning and taunting the non-existent audience. Uda turned to the other side, sweeping her arm toward Zoro and Kuina, who stood ready with serious expressions on their faces. And on the right, we have the challengers, from Shimotsuki Village. Roronoa Zoro and Shimotsuki Kuina. Zoro and Kuina exchanged bemused glances, then turned to Uda with speechless expressions. What the hell was that? Kuina asked flatly, raising an eyebrow at the overly theatrical introduction. Uda flushed with embarrassment, her cheeks turning pink. Don't ask me, she muttered. Ask this dumbass, she said, jerking her thumb toward Luffy, who had a satisfied grin plastered on his face. He told me to say it before the match started, Uda continued, shaking her head while Zoro and Kuina sighed, clearly unimpressed but deciding to drop the topic. Luffy stretched his arms lazily. So, are you two ready? He asked. His tone as relaxed as if he was about to stroll through a park rather than engage in a battle. Before the fight could begin, Kuina raised her hand, a serious expression on her face. Luffy, before we start, I just want to say this, she began. Thanks for saving us and feeding us. But make no mistake, her eyes narrowed, her grip tightening on the sai. We're not going easy on you. Zoro nodded in agreement. Kuina's right. We've got dreams to achieve, he said, his voice low and determined. And we're never going to follow anyone weaker than us. Good, Luffy grinned, clearly pleased by their determination. That's exactly how it should be, he replied. Now, let's stop wasting time and get this fight started. As Kuina and Zoro prepared themselves, they carefully observed Luffy. But their eyes twitched with annoyance as they noticed his calm, almost lazy stance, hands casually hanging at his sides, A smug smile still stretched across his face. His posture screamed nonchalance, as though he didn't see them as a threat at all. "The bastard's underestimating us," Zoro growled, his irritation rising as he shifted into his battle stance. "I'm going to wipe that smug grin off his face." Kuina didn't respond, but the fire in her eyes told the same story. She gripped her side tightly, ready to strike at any moment. She had no intention of being taken lightly, especially after the incident with her father. Zoro and Kuina's fighting spirit ignited, and determination flashed in their eyes. Zoro gripped the hilts of his 3 swords. Wado Ichimonji held firmly in his mouth, and the other 2 in his hands. Kuina, standing to his right, held her 2 side tightly with deadly precision, glaring at Luffy with sharp and unwavering eyes. Luffy, wearing his signature grin, gave a light chuckle. "I'm not underestimating you guys," he said. "I just know that with you 2 as my opponents, there's nothing to worry about." A vein bulged on Zoro's forehead at Luffy's dismissive words, and without a second thought, he launched himself forward. His 3 swords gleamed as they slashed through the air in a crisscross motion, aiming for Luffy's torso with deadly precision. But before the blades could land, Luffy moved, sliding smoothly to the side, his feet barely lifting from the ground. The attack missed by a hair's breadth, Zoro's swords cutting through nothing but air. Zoro's eyes widened as he skidded to a halt, confusion flooding his mind. "What the hell, I didn't even see him move." "Too slow," Luffy said casually, his voice carrying a playful edge as if he was taunting a child. Before Zoro could react, Kuina darted in from the side. She was fast, her movements precise as she twirled her sai, aiming for Luffy's flank in a deadly thrust. Uta, who was observing from the side, noticed that, unlike Zoro's brute force, her attack was more calculated, designed to find the gaps in Luffy's defenses. However, unfortunately for Kuina, Luffy ducked beneath her strike with an effortless fluidity while her sai whistled past his head, missing by a fraction of an inch. "What the hell? Does he have eyes in the back of his head?" Kuina thought, disbelief flashing through her mind. Unbeknownst to Kuina, using observation haki, Luffy knew exactly where she was coming from, even though he had his back turned toward her. "Nice try," Luffy said, leaning back on one foot, his hands still by his sides. Zoro, meanwhile, was already on the move again, charging in from Luffy's other side. This time, his swords came at Luffy from multiple angles, one aimed low, the other too high, forcing Luffy to choose between dodging or blocking. But Luffy didn't need to dodge. Instead, he raised his forearms, and with a faint black sheen of armament haki coating them, he blocked Zoro's blades. The metallic clang of steel hitting hardened skin echoed through the beach. Zoro looked at Luffy with wide eyes upon seeing his blades getting blocked by Luffy's bare skin. Then his face twisted in frustration as he tried to push down with all his strength, but Luffy didn't even budge. Zoro's frustration only grew stronger when he noticed Luffy once again looking at him with a glint of amusement in his eyes before twisting his body and deflecting Zoro's swords to the side with almost no effort. As Zoro staggered slightly from the force of his own momentum, Luffy stepped into his guard. In that split second, Luffy's hand shot out like a viper, delivering a palm strike directly to Zoro's stomach, using just enough armament haki to make it sting. The force sent Zoro flying backward, skidding across the sand before he managed to catch himself. As Zoro was recovering from the attack, Kuina didn't waste a moment, using the opening to launch another series of strikes, this time aiming for his ribs and stomach. Luffy didn't even bother to block. Instead, he leaned and twisted, dodging each of her strikes with minimal effort, his body moving in perfect rhythm. His mastery of total concentration breathing allowed him to remain in complete control of his body's movements and stamina, without wasting a single breath. Frustration flashed in Kuina's eyes as Luffy avoided her strikes with ease. She spun, slashing upward with one sai in a final attempt to land a blow. But Luffy caught her wrist mid-strike. His grip was firm but not painful, his eyes meeting hers with a look that said he wasn't even trying. "You're fast, Kuina," Luffy acknowledged, still holding her wrist, but not fast enough. With a gentle push, Luffy sent her stumbling back, her feet scrambling to regain balance. He didn't press the attack, simply standing there with that infuriatingly calm smile and his breathing still even, giving Zoro and Kuina the illusion that he wasn't even trying, which only added to their frustration. Zoro charged again, more furious than ever, his swords a blur as he unleashed a flurry of attacks. To a normal person, each of Zoro's strikes would have been precise, powerful, and relentless, but unfortunately for him, Luffy parried every single one of his strikes with his forearms, using just enough haki to deflect the blades without taking any damage. Then Luffy's eyes sharpened, and without warning, he vanished from Zoro's sight for a split second, using a burst of speed enhanced by his mastery of breath control and observation haki. Zoro barely had time to blink before Luffy reappeared behind him, one hand resting lightly on Zoro's shoulder. "Behind you," Luffy whispered. Zoro didn't even have time to turn before Luffy delivered a sharp tap to the back of his neck. The blow, light as it was, sent Zoro crashing face first into the sand. Kuina saw her opening and leapt at Luffy, but once again, Luffy saw it coming. He sidestepped smoothly, letting her momentum carry landed. He gently tapped the back of her leg with his foot, causing her to lose her balance and fall to one knee. Luffy stood over them both, his expression shifting from playful to serious, a cold edge in his voice. "You two are strong," he admitted, his gaze hardening, "but not strong enough." Zoro struggled to his feet, panting, sweat dripping down his face. Kuina followed, equally winded, her grip on her side tightening as she exchanged a glance with her childhood friend. Without a word, they rushed Luffy together, determination blazing in their eyes. But Luffy was done playing. As they closed in, he exhaled slowly and with a burst of speed, he moved faster than either of them could react, appearing between them in an instant. His palms flashed out, tapping both Zoro and Kuina on their chests with haki-infused strikes. The force of the blows sent both of them flying backward, crashing into the sand with heavy thuds. Luffy stood tall, dusting off his hands, his breathing even and calm. "Thanks for the workout," he said with a grin. "You two are good. But you've still got a long way to go." Then Luffy walked over to where Zoro and Kuina lay groaning in the sand. "So? You've had enough? Or do you want to go another round?" he asked, his grin widening into a smug, teasing smile. Zoro and Kuina glared up at him. "Screw you," they both shouted in unison. Luffy laughed heartily, their anger only fueling his amusement. "Haha, that's a no, I guess," he said with a mischievous glint in his eyes. "Well, it looks like I won our little bet, which means..." Zoro and Kuina exchanged defeated looks as Luffy's grin grew wider. He stretched his arms toward them triumphantly. "Hey guys, welcome to the crew." Meanwhile, in Shell's Town, word of Captain Axehand Morgan's defeat had already reached Marine headquarters, prompting a swift response from the other side. Today was the day a high-ranking officer would arrive to investigate the incident, assess the situation, and determine what had truly transpired in this Marine division of this town. At the Marine base, the soldiers were hard at work, trying to compensate for the shame their former captain had brought upon them. The air was tense, filled with apprehension, as no one wanted to give the impression that they were anything but diligent in the wake of Morgan's disgrace. But their focus was abruptly broken when the doors to the base swung open. A figure walked in confidently, the echo of her boots bouncing off the stone walls of the base. The Marines turned their heads, immediately taken aback as they saw a young woman with long strawberry blonde hair, green eyes, and prominent lips. She wore a strapless pink dress with red blotch-like patterns on it, a whip neatly folded in her hand, and a marine coat draped over her shoulders that notified everyone at the base of her identity. Then, without giving any attention or offering any explanation to the Marines who were gawking at her, the woman strode purposefully through the base. A few minutes later, she reached the door of the captain's office and, without bothering to knock, swung it open with a swift motion. Inside, Ripper, the Marine officer temporarily in charge of the base, was startled by the sudden intrusion. He jumped up from his desk, about to shout at whoever dared enter unannounced, but the words died in his throat the moment he looked up and met her icy green eyes staring him down with a frigid, commanding intensity. "My name is Rear Admiral Kujaku," the young woman introduced herself in a cool and authoritative voice. "I'm here to investigate the situation regarding Captain Morgan." Ripper gulped, standing at attention as he realized who was in front of him. He dared not speak out of turn and simply nodded in acknowledgement, knowing this was not someone to be trifled with. For the next few hours, Kujaku conducted a thorough investigation, interrogating Marines and reviewing the official reports. However, as the investigation dragged on, her frown deepened. No matter how much she pressed the Marines for details, their responses were unnervingly consistent, as though they were reading from a script. Every time she questioned them, she got the same carefully worded accounts of Morgan's defeat. How the people of the town grew fed up with Morgan's violence and misuse of power and decided to overthrow him with the help of the Marines in the town. To everyone's credit, the testimonies were consistent, but the lack of variance only raised Kujaku's suspicions. After hours of questioning, Kujaku finally left the Marine base with a dissatisfied expression. She made her way to the local tavern, where she found a tall, muscular man with short pink hair waiting for her at a table in the back corner. "Ah, Kujaku, you're back. How did the investigation go?" the man asked, a cheerful smile on his face as he leaned back in his chair. "Shut up, Kobe," Kujaku snapped, irritation evident in her tone. "You were supposed to accompany me to the Marine base. Instead, you disappeared the moment we reached the shore." "Yeah, sorry about that," Kobe said with an awkward chuckle, rubbing the back of his head. "Anyway, so what did you find?" "Nothing different, the same as what had been documented in official reports," Kujaku said with a frown. "No matter how much I tried to intimidate them, they all repeated the same story like they were reading from a script." "Ah, that's to be expected after what this town went through," Kobe said, nodding his head. Seeing his response, Kujaku narrowed her eyes. "You know something, don't you?" "Yep, I do." Kobe's cheerful demeanor shifted to something more serious. "Well, while you were interrogating the Marines," he said, gesturing with air quotes, "I did some investigating of my own. Turns out, Mr. Garp had a pretty good reason for entrusting this mission to our branch when anyone else could have done it quite easily." At the mention of Vice Admiral Garp's name, Kujaku's curiosity spiked. She leaned in, her green eyes narrowing. "Go on," she said. Before Kobe could elaborate, a small figure approached their table, carrying a plate of food. "Big brother Kobe. Here's the food you ordered." The little girl smiled brightly as she placed the plate in front of him. Kobe's face lit up. "Thanks, Rika," he said warmly, reaching into his pocket and pulling out a chocolate bar. "Here, take this as a tip for the best waitress in town." Rika's eyes sparkled with joy as she accepted the chocolate, tucking it into the pocket of her apron. "Thank you," she beamed. Then, after a brief pause, she hesitated before speaking again. "Big brother Kobe, can I ask you for a favor?" "Sure, what is it?" Kobe asked, tilting his head in curiosity. Rika's expression brightened, and she pulled out a neatly folded piece of paper, placing it carefully on the table. "Since you're friends with Big Brother Luffy, can you give this to him, please?" Kobe's smile softened as he took the paper and carefully folded it before tucking it into his coat pocket. "Of course, Rika. I'll make sure Luffy gets it the next time I see him." "Thank you so much," Rika exclaimed with excitement, bouncing back toward the kitchen. Kujaku, who had been quietly observing the exchange, raised an eyebrow. The name, Luffy, was lingering in her mind. She turned to Kobe, a thoughtful expression crossing her face. "Luffy? Wait, isn't that?" Kobe grinned, leaning back in his chair. "Yep, that's him," he replied casually. "Anyway," he said before she could ask anything else. "Why don't you join me? I've ordered your portion as well." Kujaku sighed, realizing she wasn't going to get any more answers from him right now. Reluctantly, she joined him for lunch. After finishing their meal, the pair made their way back to the Marine ship where Captain Morgan was being held in custody, awaiting transfer. As they boarded the vessel, one of the Marines approached them with a salute. "Sir, are we heading straight to Marineford to submit the report?" Kobe shook his head. "Not just yet. First, steer the ship toward my hometown. It's been aided my parents' graves." The Marine nodded and turned to relay the order to the helmsman. Kobe leaned on the edge of the ship, staring out at the vast sea. Then, as if speaking more to himself than anyone else, he added, "After that, I'll do a small tour of East Blue and clean my house." With those words, he left the deck and went to his personal cabin. One of the Marines, overhearing Kobe's words, muttered to his companion with a smirk. "Damn. I feel bad for the pirates around here. They probably thought they were safe, hiding out in the weakest of the four seas." The other Marine grinned. "Yeah, those bastards should start counting their days." There's nothing but impel down waiting for them if they cross paths with Rear Admiral, Iron Fist, Kobe. To be continued. Rear Admiral, Iron Fist, Raphael. System. After leaving the small inhabited island behind, Luffy, Uda, Zoro, and Kuina continued their journey toward Orange Town. Knowing the trip would take at least a week, Luffy decided it was the perfect opportunity to start teaching Zoro and Kuina the basics of haki and total concentration breathing. Even Uda wanted to learn these techniques due to the stamina requirement for her new powers. Before beginning the training, Luffy decided to lay everything on the table. He explained his mysterious, devil fruit, that allowed him to summon random and unique items and use a personal storage space. He also demonstrated his crystal manipulation abilities and revealed the unique powers Uda had gained from the devil fruit he'd provided her, solidifying his outlandish claims. Zoro crossed his arms and shook his head, his expression both bewildered and impressed. "I was right about you. You're really fucking absurd," he muttered. "Yesterday, I thought devil fruits were a myth. Now, I think I've seen two of the strongest versions of them." "I mean, you could say that," Luffy replied with a casual shrug, "but not really. The devil fruits I get from my fruit are special. They don't exist in this world. So technically, you still haven't seen the best that this world's devil fruits can offer, and neither have you seen the best that my fruit can offer either." "Hey, you said that your devil fruit gave these side to you, right?" Kuina asked, twirling the weapons in her hands as Luffy nodded his head. "So that means you can get even more amazing weapons in the future," she said, her face lighting up with anticipation of getting even more unique weapons. "Yeah, probably," Luffy admitted. "But that doesn't mean every weapon I get will be for you." He quickly dampened her excitement. "The weapon needs to suit your personality and fighting style. Now, since you're aiming to be a weapons master, that works in your favor. But there might be times when I'll prioritize someone else if a weapon fits them better." "Fine," Kuina said, sulking a little. "It's your power, after all. Do what you want." Luffy's sweat dropped comically. "Well, she's surprisingly bratty and childlike once she lets her guard down," he thought, not quite sure how to handle her sulking. Clearing his throat, Luffy clapped his hands to get everyone's attention. "Anyway, let's get started. Today, we're diving into haki and total concentration breathing," he announced. A cruel grin spread across his face, one that instantly sent shivers down Uda's spine. "I'm warning you guys in advance. This is going to be hell. You'll hate me during the process, but when you see the results, you'll love them." Kuina gave him an unimpressed look. Does he have to overdramatize everything? "No," Uda groaned, rubbing her temples. "He's not overdramatizing. Trust me, I tried learning total concentration breathing before and gave up. I wouldn't be trying again if it wasn't for my teleportation powers draining my stamina so fast. 6 trips solo or 3 with passengers, and I'm drained for a considerable time." Zoro, meanwhile, was unfazed. "I don't care how hard this training is," he said confidently, folding his arms over his chest. "If it can make me stronger, I'll handle it." "Same," Kuina added, her grip tightening on her sai. "If I wasn't ready for hardship, I wouldn't be out here at sea in the first place." Uda groaned, slumping her shoulders dramatically. Why am I stuck with a bunch of muscleheads?" "Uda, stop killing the mood," Luffy chided, narrowing his eyes at her. He then turned to Zoro and Kuina with a nod. "Good mindset. Keep that up, and you'll master these techniques in no time," he said, and he actually meant it. Luffy was confident for a reason. It had taken him almost a year to master the basics of observation and armament haki as well as total concentration breathing from scratch. Now, although he did have a manual about learning haki, it didn't make it any easier to understand the instructions written inside the manual. They were quite vague at best, which kind of made sense to him. If it were this easy to learn and teach haki, it would already be commonplace throughout the seas. However, unlike everyone in the world, Luffy had one major advantage. Raphael, his super-intelligent, AI-like friend. Raphael had managed to develop a way to learn a fictional technique by just studying the source material. Now that Luffy had used both of those techniques for quite a while, it had given Raphael enough time to study them and develop a way to cut learning time for them in half, making the training process for his crew far more efficient. Luffy's grin widened, a glint of challenge in his eyes. "Well then, let the hell begin," he declared, slamming his fist into his palm. A week later, Luffy and his crew finally spotted a large island on the horizon, its silhouette marked by visible human-made structures. The sight of the town confirmed that they had finally arrived at Orange Town. During the journey, Luffy had continued to push Zoro, Kuina, and Uda in their training, although neither Zoro nor Kuina had managed to manifest haki yet, which was fine by Luffy since he hadn't been expecting immediate results. He was still impressed with their dedication. They trained tirelessly, following his every instruction without a single complaint. Uda, despite her constant grumbling and dramatic sighs, also gave her all when it came to mastering total concentration breathing. However, mastering the technique required pushing one's lungs to their absolute limit, and training on a small fishing boat didn't provide the ideal environment. The lack of space and limited resources made it difficult for him to give her any substantial exercise to help her. Luffy himself, despite overseeing the crew's progress, was hitting his own roadblocks. He had already mastered the techniques he was teaching, and while his diamond head powers were powerful, they had stagnated at 35%, no matter how much he used them. Raphael had a theory. Luffy's abilities were not getting stimulated enough in controlled training scenarios. His powers were reaching a plateau because he wasn't using them in high-pressure, real-world situations. In short, in the nicest way possible, Raphael told him to stop relying on haki all the time and start using his diamond head powers while dealing with troublesome people like Morgan if he wanted to break through his current limits. Luffy had taken the advice to heart, but for now, he shoved those concerns to the back of his mind. Right now, his focus was on the island ahead, feeling kind of excited to meet Buggy and test his crystals against the annoying clown and his ridiculous chop fruit. However, as the boat got closer to the port, Luffy's excitement faded, replaced by confusion. His eyes narrowed as he took in the scene before him. The town wasn't at all what he had expected. He had anticipated a gloomy, oppressive atmosphere, the kind that came with a town under the control of Buggy's crew. Instead, Orange Town was bustling with energy. People moved freely through the streets, and laughter echoed through the air. Children ran past market stalls, and merchants enthusiastically sold their wares. The port itself was lively, with fishermen unloading their catches and dockworkers going about their business with bright smiles. What the hell is going on here? Luffy muttered to himself as their boat docked at the port. 1 week ago, while Luffy was recruiting Zoro and Kuina to his crew on a remote island a little far away, on Orange Island, the atmosphere was tense, and everyone was hiding inside their houses due to the invasion and takeover of their town by none other than the Buggy Pirates. It started 6 months ago when one day the Buggy Pirates arrived in this town and, before anyone knew it, announced it as their own territory. The people of the town, of course, tried to fight back, but Buggy and his men ruthlessly killed any and all people who tried to oppose him. In the end, any and all hope for freedom established his rule over the town with no one to oppose him. But today, something unexpected happened. For the first time in what felt like years, the people of Orange Town saw a marine ship docking at their port. The townsfolk peered out from behind their closed doors and curtains, watching with a mix of hope and fear. A man with pink hair disembarked, his marine coat billowing behind him as he strode onto the dock. His frown deepened as his eyes fell upon the Buggy Pirates' ship docked nearby. His frown deepened even further as Kobe, the rear admiral, walked further into the town, immediately noticing the bleak atmosphere. The streets were eerily quiet, and most of the buildings were boarded up or had visible signs of damage from pirate attacks. Something is definitely wrong here, Kobe thought as he continued forward. His footsteps eventually brought him to a house with a white dog standing guard at the entrance. The dog growled at Kobe, baring its teeth, telling him to stay away from the house. "Hey, buddy, what's wrong?" Kobe knelt down, trying to calm the animal, but the dog continued to glare at him, not willing to move. Suddenly, an elderly man with curling gray hair and bespectacled eyes approached. "Ah, Mr. Marine, please don't be offended by little Chow Chow here," the man said. Kobe stood up, shaking his head. "No offense taken. But who are you, and what's going on with this place?" he asked, looking around. "My name is Boodle. I'm the mayor of this town," the old man introduced himself, his face shadowed with the weariness of a man who had carried the burden of his people's suffering for too long. As for what's wrong, his expression darkened as he told Kobe about Buggy's reign of terror. the murders, the oppression, and the absolute hopelessness that had consumed the once lively town. Kobe listened intently with a serious expression on his face. After Boodle finished, Kobe placed a reassuring hand on the mayor's shoulder. "Don't worry, sir. I'll take care of those pirates. I apologize that it took us this long to recognize your suffering, but I'll fix it today." With that, Kobe turned and walked back to his ship. Upon returning, he immediately called for his men. "Listen up, everyone," Kobe's voice rang out, drawing the attention of the Marines. He then explained the situation in Orange Town. It was Marine negligence that allowed this terror to go unchecked. Today, we correct that mistake. He issued orders quickly. "You all form a perimeter around the town. Don't let anyone escape." As for Buggy and his crew, Kobe cracked his knuckles, a cold smile forming on his face. "Leave them to me." The Marines saluted and moved swiftly, following Kobe's orders. Soon, they were stationed around the town, blocking every possible exit route. Meanwhile, Kobe prepared to confront the pirates when a familiar voice interrupted him. "You sure you don't want any help with this one?" Kujaku asked, folding her arms over her chest as she stood nearby. Kobe waved her off with a grin. "Nah, I've got this. I left you to deal with everything in Shellstown, so this one's mine. Besides, you deserve a break. So sit back and enjoy the show." "Sure, just send someone to call out to me if things get dicey on your end," Kujaku said, dropping the topic. She knew that Kobe was more than enough to handle anything the East Blue could throw at him. "Well then, Kujaku, see you in a bit," Kobe said and jumped out of the ship. Then just as he was about to head towards the Buggy Pirates base when suddenly he once again noticed their ship and an idea crossed his mind. He immediately called two of the Marines stationed near the boat and asked them to check for any valuables inside the Buggy Pirates ship and to bring them out. A few minutes later, the Marines returned with a handful of treasure and items looted from Buggy's ship. Kobe nodded, then picked up a fist-sized rock from the ground. Then a grayish-silver sheen covered the rock and without wasting time, he hurled the rock at Buggy's ship with incredible force. The impact created a massive hole in the ship's hull, and within moments, Buggy's ship began sinking to the bottom of the harbor. The townspeople, peeking out from their homes, gasped in astonishment before bursting into cheers. For the first time in months, they saw the symbol of their oppression destroyed. Kujaku rolled her eyes from the sidelines, muttering under her breath, "Show off." Once Buggy's ship was completely submerged, Kobe turned and made his way to the pirates' base. Inside Buggy's hideout, panic reigned. "Hurry up, you idiots! The Marines are here!" Buggy the Clown shouted at his men, his face red with fury. "We need to get out of here before they catch us. And don't leave anything behind. If I lose any treasure, I'll sell every one of you to get it back." The pirates scrambled, stuffing valuables into bags as fast as they could. But suddenly, a calm voice interrupted the chaos. Now, Buggy," Kobe said as he strolled into the hideout, his marine coat draped over his shoulders. "Is it really wise to threaten your men when the Marines are here?" Buggy spun around, his jaw dropping in comical disbelief. What the hell is a rear admiral doing in East Blue?" "Who knows," Kobe shrugged with a grin. "Maybe it's karma catching up with you. After all, don't you think it's time you repented for what you've put these people through?" He slammed his fist into his palm, a cruel smile spreading across his face. "Now, you've got two choices. First, you can walk out of here and quietly surrender to the Marines. Or second." Kobe's eyes gleamed dangerously. "I can beat the crap out of you and drag your unconscious body back to the ship." For a moment, the room was silent. Then, without hesitation, Buggy's men bolted for the exit. Some rushed past Kobe, throwing down their weapons and surrendering to the Marines. Others desperately tried to escape the town, hoping to avoid capture. In the end, only 3 people remained in the room. Buggy, the captain clown. Moji, the fat fur-wearing man riding on a huge lion. And Kabaji, the slender black-haired man with swords on his waist. "Who the hell do you think you are, huh?" Moji, the lion tamer, sneered. "You're just one guy. We can take you out easily." "Yeah, boss, we can beat him and use him to negotiate our way out of here," Kabaji added, drawing his swords with a wicked grin. "Oh, you want to capture me?" Kobe, unfazed, simply smiled. "Go ahead, try." Buggy, meanwhile, was sweating, unsure if his minions' plan would work or not. After all, he used to be a member of the Pirate King's crew and knew that one doesn't climb the ranks in the Marines without considerable power or connections in high places. Now the question was, which category did the Rear Admiral in front of him fit into? Meanwhile, acting on their words, Kabaji and Moji rushed toward Kobe, who stood there without moving and just observed the incoming attack. But then, just as they were about to hit him, suddenly he coated his fist in a steel-like sheen, and before they could even react, slammed his fist into their faces, and both pirates were knocked out cold, crumpling to the floor. Buggy's eyes bulged. "You're a devil fruit user," he shrieked, pointing at Kobe with trembling hands. "Oh, you noticed," Kobe said dryly, rolling his eyes. "Oh, was kind of devil fruit, is it? Buggy, ever the opportunist?" asked in a falsely enthusiastic tone, thinking about how if he survived this, he could sell information on this Rear Admiral for a considerable amount of money. However, Kobe, who was unaware of how tricky and cunning Buggy was, didn't think much of Buggy's question as he wasn't perceiving him as a threat at all. "Well, I guess there's no harm in telling you since you'll be going to impel down for a long time," he said. However, in the meantime his hands weren't idle either, as he was already moving and handcuffing both unconscious men and tying them with the rope he had on him. "I have eaten the Haga Haga no Mi, steel fruit. Which makes me a steel man." Kobe exd towards Buggy to arrest him. "My fruit, along with my training, allows me to hit fast and incredibly hard," he finished as he stood in front of the clown. "Now, tell me, Buggy, are you going to come quietly, or do you want to join your friends over there, unconscious and tied in a rope?" Buggy's face contorted with fear, but he quickly raised his hands in mock surrender. "No need for that. I surrender." He shook his head vigorously. "There's no way a normal guy like me could fight a devil fruit user like you." "Smart choice. I hate unnecessary violence," Kobe said, slapping the cuffs on Buggy's wrists. "Hopefully, sometime an impelled down will make you rethink your life choices," he said, and started escorting Buggy out of the hideout, not seeing a cunning smile on the clown's face, whose eyes were fixated on the cuffs in his hands. Normal cuffs in his hands. Laughing internally, Buggy kept walking while waiting for his chance to escape. No matter what, Buggy knew he was going to survive. After all, in his mind, he knew that the great Buggy always survives. However, at that time, neither Kobe nor the people of Orangetown knew about it, and neither one cared about it either. After all, finally, the plague known as Buggy Pirates was gone from Orangetown, and the people of the town were celebrating once more. "Present, well, that was a dud," Luffy muttered, leaning against the edge of his ship, eyes narrowed at the lively port of Orangetown. "Whoever this Rear Admiral Iron Fist is, that asshole robbed me of my valuable achievement points," he thought bitterly, cursing the Marine officer who had swooped in and taken down Buggy before he could get there. After hearing about the events that had transpired a week ago, how Buggy had been defeated and the town freed by a Marine, it quickly became clear to Luffy that there was nothing left of interest in Orangetown. Buggy was gone, and the town was no longer in danger. With a sigh, he headed back to the boat. Before leaving, he gave Zoro and Kuina some money and told them to buy whatever supplies they needed for the journey. Kuina, Luffy had said, make sure Zoro doesn't wander off and get lost. Kuina gave him a nod of understanding, while Zoro scowled but didn't protest. His bad sense of direction had become a running joke on the ship, and at this point, he didn't care enough to fight them. Now, with Zoro and Kuina busy gathering supplies, Luffy turned to Uta, who was lounging on the deck. "Hey, Uta, can you check the map and find the nearest island from here?" he asked. Uta stretched and reached for the map, spreading it out in front of her. After a few moments of scanning, she tapped a spot on the paper. "Looks like the nearest place is Gecko Islands." "Oh, isn't that where Yasop's hometown is? Syrup Village?" "Yeah, Syrup Village. That's the one," Luffy nodded. "Alright, once Zoro and Kuina get back, let's set sail for Syrup Village." With that decision made, Luffy headed toward the cabin. "I'm gonna take a nap. Don't bother me unless it's important," he said casually over his shoulder as he entered the cabin and shut the door behind him. Once inside, Luffy locked the door, flopped onto the bed, and pulled out his smartphone. "Let's see what Oda's been cooking up lately," he murmured, grinning as he opened up the app and scrolled through the latest chapters of One Piece, to be continued.